The police stopped him outside his own building, suspecting him solely because of his skin color, unaware that he owned their department. His response would surprise even the most seasoned. But let's start from the beginning. Evening was settling over the downtown area as Thomas Johnson parked his black sedan outside the office building he had recently acquired. A 42-year-old black entrepreneur with short black hair, a well-groomed beard, and an expressive gaze, Thomas was dressed in an elegant dark gray suit that fit his sturdy frame perfectly with a white shirt. Exiting his car, he took a few steps while checking his emails on his phone and noticed two police officers staring intently in his direction. Jackson, a middle-aged officer with graying hair, a stern expression, and a strong build, squinted suspiciously as though Thomas somehow didn't belong in that place. His partner, Officer Miller, another white man around 40, was lean and quiet, already preparing for action, watching Thomas with a hint of disdain in his eyes. The officers exchanged a glance, and with a nod, Jackson decisively approached Thomas. "Good evening, sir," Jackson said, his tone far from friendly. "Would you please show us some ID and explain what you're doing here?" Thomas, noticing a small crowd beginning to gather, calmly handed over his driver's license and car registration. He sensed the tension in the air, but chose not to argue. Jackson took the documents and examined them thoroughly, as if expecting to find something suspicious. Then he glanced at Miller and gave a quick nod. Miller immediately approached Thomas's car, opening doors and inspecting the interior. Thomas watched this intrusion into his personal space with growing anger, trying to remain calm, knowing that any protest could lead to unwanted consequences. "What exactly is the reason for this search?" Thomas asked firmly but calmly, looking directly at Jackson. "You're in a high-risk area, sir," Jackson replied with a touch of disdain. "We received a report about suspicious activity. We need to ensure everything is in order." The officer's words sounded so absurd that Thomas could barely hold back a sarcastic smile. Meanwhile, some onlookers, noticing the injustice of the situation, began recording the incident on their phones. Among the crowd, someone recognized Thomas and shouted, "Hey, what are you doing? That's Thomas Johnson, the owner of this building. Don't you know who you're dealing with?" The police officers hesitated, visibly thrown off. Jackson paused, as though processing what he had heard, but then turned away, ignoring the comment, and continued the inspection. Miller, with renewed zeal, continued searching the trunk, seemingly hoping to find something incriminating. Feeling both indignation and humiliation, Thomas quietly but firmly said, "I think I should clarify who I am to put an end to this nonsense." The next morning, Thomas woke up to a flood of notifications and calls. That evening, his video with the officers had gone viral, and people across the country were sharing it, expressing outrage. In the comments, people demanded justice, with some sharing their own experiences of similar prejudice and hostility from law enforcement. Thomas's phone rang constantly. Colleagues, friends, acquaintances, and even strangers expressed support, and journalists inundated him with interview requests. Realizing his story could play an important role in the fight against injustice, Thomas decided to make a public statement. By noon, he agreed to an interview with a local news station. He arranged a meeting at the cafe on the ground floor of his building, right where everything had happened, and waited for the journalists who were already setting up their cameras and lights. The journalists surrounded Thomas, dozens of cameras aimed at him, and he felt the weight of the moment. "Last night, I realized that this incident isn't just about me," Thomas began, looking straight into the camera lens. "It's about everyone who's ever faced injustice due to the color of their skin, due to biases that shouldn't exist in our society. Yesterday it was me, tomorrow it will be someone else if we don't change the system." His confident yet calm words struck a chord with listeners. The report of his story made the evening news and quickly spread across social media. Support grew steadily. Community leaders, lawyers, and public figures rallied behind Thomas, calling for an investigation into the actions of officers Jackson and Miller. Meanwhile, feeling the pressure of public opinion, the police department attempted to justify itself. They released a statement claiming that the officers' actions were standard procedure in a high-crime area, This statement sparked even more public outcry, as people grew angry that the police seemed to be trying to cover up and excuse their biased behavior. Crowds began gathering outside the police department. Activists, community organization representatives, and ordinary citizens held a rally, demanding the officers be dismissed and a fair investigation take place. Observing the growing support, Thomas realized that this incident had grown far beyond a personal insult. He understood that he could use this opportunity to advocate for societal change. Deciding not to stop, he reached out to prominent lawyers and public figures to unite efforts and push for real reforms in a system that allowed such treatment. A few days after the incident and the ensuing public outcry, Thomas received an official invitation to meet with the city's mayor. The letter included an apology from the administration and a proposal to discuss reforms aimed at improving police-community relations. Thomas understood that this invitation was not only a personal opportunity for him, but a chance to communicate to city officials the demands for systemic change. He accepted the invitation, knowing an important conversation was ahead. On the appointed day, Thomas, again in his elegant dark gray suit, confidently entered City Hall. Accompanied by several journalists ready to capture every moment, he was greeted in the lobby by the mayor, a man in his 50s with a diplomatic smile and a slightly tense expression. The mayor shook Thomas's hand firmly and said, "I want to apologize for what happened, and believe me, we are determined to make things right." They proceeded to the meeting room, where the chief of police, several department representatives, and legal advisors were already waiting. The room was spacious and well lit, but the atmosphere felt tense. The officers, most of whom were middle-aged white men, avoided eye contact with Thomas, while the police chief, a man around 60 with graying hair and a grim look, appeared visibly displeased by the events. The meeting began with a speech from the mayor, who expressed regret over the incident and assured everyone that the authorities were committed to preventing similar occurrences in the future. Thomas listened with a calm but focused expression. When the mayor finished, Thomas spoke up. "Thank you for your words," Thomas began, looking each person in the eye. "But for many members of our community, words no longer matter. We see this kind of treatment every day. What happened to me wasn't just a random mistake. It's a symptom of a deeper problem. We need not only apologies, but concrete actions." These words stirred murmurs in the room, and the police chief, crossing his arms in frustration, said, "We're doing everything we can to Under Thomas's leadership, the commission set to work on reform initiatives. He insisted on complete transparency. All meetings were open, with community members, activists, and the media in attendance. Thomas understood that only honest and direct engagement with those who had experienced similar prejudice could uncover real issues and solutions. The commission held hours-long discussions, allowing each participant to share their ideas. At the first meeting, Thomas presented the core points of the plan: mandatory anti-bias training for officers, the creation of transparent arrest protocols, and the introduction of regular audits of police actions. He emphasized that the changes needed to affect not only the rank-and-file officers, but also leadership, to eliminate bias at all levels. His ideas were met with support from most, although some police representatives initially reacted with skepticism. Meanwhile, the police department initiated an internal investigation into Officers Jackson and Miller's actions. Under public pressure, they were temporarily suspended to allow an assessment of their behavior during Thomas's stop. This news sparked widespread debate. Some felt suspension was too lenient, while others argued that the officers deserved a chance to change their behavior. Thomas insisted that suspension alone wasn't enough. What was needed was a genuine acknowledgement of mistakes and systemic change. At another meeting, he raised the issue of a public apology from the police to the community. The police chief initially resisted, claiming that the department had already made significant strides in reform, but pressure from the commission and the public forced him to concede. Finally, it was decided that the department would issue an official apology. The next day, a crowd gathered in front of the police department. Local media representatives, activists, and ordinary citizens, all supporting Thomas's cause. The visibly tense police chief stepped up to the microphones and, gathering himself, delivered a brief statement, acknowledging mistakes made by the officers. He promised the department would strengthen internal oversight and implement new conduct standards. His words sounded stiff, but the importance of the moment was undeniable. When he finished, Thomas approached the microphone. His voice was steady, and his gaze filled with determination. "This incident reminded us that justice cannot be a privilege," he said, looking over the gathered crowd. "We must ensure that every person feels protected, regardless of skin color or social status. Let this be the beginning of a long journey toward true justice." The crowd met his words with applause, and someone shouted, "Thank you, Thomas!" Thomas felt immense support. His actions had inspired people, and he knew this was the start of significant change. Approaching some activists, he exchanged firm handshakes and thanked them for their support. For him, this wasn't just a victory, but a step toward a fair society where such incidents would be impossible. Later, Thomas returned to his building.